Peace everyone, Unmask here, and today I'll be showing you how to draw these cherries. On the left side of the screen you'll see the color palette I'm using. The numbers correspond to Luminance colored pencil, and I'm coloring on Stonehenge vellum paper. For those that support my channel on Patreon, the real-time drawing video is available to you now. Alright, so let's get started. Alright everyone, so the first thing that I start doing is sketching out the cherries with my 2B mechanical pencil. The way that I sketch this out is by kind of creating the triangle that is the general shape of the reference photo, and then I use squares to kind of block in the shape of the cherries. Once I get the shape that I want, I use my kneaded eraser to roll over it to pick up some of the graphite so that I'm not drawing on top of too much graphite, because it can cause some blending issues if you do. So I always like to erase it before starting with my colored pencil. The next thing I do is I use my 802 to outline the cherries, and then I switch to my 866 and 589 to start drawing in the stems. Once I get some of the darker areas of the stems drawn in, I use my 015 to just color it in. Once I do that, I kind of leave the stems alone for a bit, and then I switch over to my 859, and this is where I start to draw in the shaded area of the cherries. The way that I'm doing this is I'm avoiding all the highlights and pretty much just putting a nice red coat on the entire part of the cherry that's red. As you can see, I left the edges alone and all of the highlights. I drew in the negative space for the highlights, and then I just simply color in around them. Making sure that you are accurate with where your highlights are and where the more contrasted color changes occur. This really helps make your cherries look shiny and reflective the way they are. And I'm not using a lot of pencil pressure here. I'm just trying to get a smooth coverage. The next thing I do is I switch to my 599 pencil, and this is where I start to color in a little bit more of the darker parts of the red on the cherries. The color change between the 589 and the 599 is very subtle, but it's really important to make those cherries look reflective. The next thing that I do is I use my paint thinner and my number 8 round brush to just blend everything out and make it look a bit smoother. Once I do that, I switch back to my 866 pencil and a little bit of my 876 pencil, and I start working on the stems again, just getting them done and out of the way. I use a little bit of my 407 to get some of the really dark parts on the stem, and then I just go through with my paint thinner and kind of brush everything out smoothly and blend everything together. There's not a whole lot of detail on the stems, but it is really important to make sure you get the values correct so that they look real. The last thing that I do with the stems after blending them out is I just go through with my 407 and my 801 to hit up some of the shadows and bring out some of the highlights. Now what I'm doing is I'm using my 407 to darken the shadows, the darkest shadows on the cherries, and this is what's really going to help bring out the depth and the value in the cherries that's going to start making it look more realistic and reflective. I also add a little bit of the 876 in the highlights of the cherries, and it just kind of gives it a nice warm glow. After that, I use my 802 pencil and I color in the outside of the cherry. This is going to be the reflective part on the outer edge of the cherry that in some cases might appear white, but it's really a gray color. And then what I do is I use just a little bit of my 859 around the edges of the cherry, and then I use my paint thinner to blend it out so that the red mixes with the gray, and you get a nice desaturated reddish gray color, which really helps blend the colors together at the edge, making the transition between the two colors nice and soft. And this is what helps make the cherries look more realistic, is making sure those gradients blend together really nicely. Once I do that, I switch back to my 407 pencil, and this is where I start to get a little bit heavier handed in the shadows, because I really want to make sure the contrast is as strong as possible. I really enjoyed working on this piece because cherries are my favorite fruit, actually, so it was a lot of fun, and I always enjoy doing something that's reflective and has nice highlights to it. It's always a challenge, and it's fun to make things look realistic that have that kind of shiny property. After that, I use my paint thinner to just blend everything out, and on the highlights I kind of dab it a little bit to kind of get a fuzzy highlight to it, and then I go through with my 801 pencil and I hit up all the highlights. I add a few spots and speckles on the cherry, and this kind of gives it that wet look, and it really helps it look a bit more shiny. The next thing that I do is I continue to use the 801 at the bottom of the cherry, and this gets kind of that reflective of the ground look, and this is what really helps the cherries sit inside the paper a little bit nicely, because you kind of get the effect that the paper is reflecting up on the cherries. And then after that, I use my 802 and a little bit of the 589 and 599 to get some of the red from reflecting on the paper. And then I just use paint thinner to blend everything out to create a nice soft shadow. And then the last thing that I do is I actually used my white pencil, and then I use that to blur out the edges of the shadow to blend it into the paper really nicely. Alright everyone, here's the finished product. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. Remember that if you'd like to see the real-time video, head over to my Patreon page. Otherwise, be sure to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Peace.